The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the cracked surface of Highway 87. Heat waves shimmered above the asphalt, making the horizon dance like a mirage. It was the kind of late afternoon that made the world feel slower, quieter. But not for everyone. A black SUV coasted to a smooth stop on the shoulder, its driver calm and composed. Behind the wheel sat a woman in full military uniform, pressed, clean, precise. Her posture was perfect, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, her eyes focused on the rearview mirror. She had seen them long before they saw her. Two patrol cars screeched to a halt just behind her, lights flashing but sirens off. From them emerged two officers. Brent Wallace, tall and smug with mirrored sunglasses that seemed surgically attached to his ego, and Rick Daly, stocky, jittery, and always too eager to follow someone else's lead. Wallace approached with slow, swaggering steps. "Driver, step out of the vehicle," he barked without introduction. The woman opened the door with measured grace and stepped out. Her name tag read Johnson. Her bearing said she didn't need it. Wallace scanned her uniform with visible disdain. "What's this?" he sneered. "Halloween came early?" "I'm a service member," she replied evenly, "and this is a government-issued vehicle." Daly let out a small laugh. "Sure, and I'm the Secretary of Defense." Wallace moved closer, his tone lowering, more hostile. "No ID, no name. You're just another nobody trying to look important." He reached for her arm, but she stepped back. "I'd advise you not to touch me," she said quietly, voice calm but firm. Something in her tone, controlled, almost surgical, made Daly hesitate. But Wallace, inflated by authority and his ignorance, wasn't ready to listen. "You think you can talk to me like that? Out here, you're not in the Pentagon, sweetheart. You're on my road." Then, without warning, he yanked her wrist forward and clamped a cuff around it. Daly grabbed the other arm, locking both hands behind her back. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She simply stood still, taller, somehow, than both of them. Wallace pushed her against the hood. "You're under detention for suspicious behavior," he declared, "and impersonating military personnel. That's a federal offense, you know." Camille Johnson turned her head, lips slightly bloodied from the sudden shove, and whispered, "This is your one chance to stop. In 5 minutes, you won't be in control anymore." Wallace smirked. "Oh yeah? And what happens in 5 minutes? A unicorn shows up and tells me you're a general?" "I don't need a unicorn," she said, "just at the phone." That only made Daly laugh harder. "Phone? You don't even have a name." Wallace, amused, took her phone from the seat of the SUV and smashed it against the pavement, the screen cracking under his boot like a dry leaf. "Guess you'll have to find another fairy tale." Camille closed her eyes for a second, not from pain, but from calculation. Her silence unsettled Daly more than he'd admit. "You're scared," she said, opening her eyes again. "Not of me, but of what I represent." Wallace rolled his eyes. "And what's that exactly?" She lifted her chin, still handcuffed, blood on her lip, dignity unshaken. "Consequences." Just then a voice cut through the air. "Use mine." A young woman, maybe mid-20s, curly hair bouncing as she ran, appeared from across the street, holding out a phone like it was a lifeline. Her eyes burned with righteous fury. "She's a general, you idiots," she shouted. "You have no idea what you're doing." Wallace stepped toward the girl. "Get back." But she didn't. "I serve too," she snapped, "and I know what that uniform means." Something shifted in that moment, not just in the air, but in the balance of power. The performance was over. The clock had started ticking. Camille turned her eyes to the girl, nodded once and took the phone gently, her cuffed hands trembling. But not from fear. 5 minutes, that's all she needed. Camille Johnson held the phone like a detonator, except the explosion she was about to trigger wouldn't burn through buildings. It would burn through lies, ignorance, and arrogance. Her hands were still cuffed, but her voice was clear as she spoke into the device. "Defense Command, this is Brigadier General Camille Johnson, code 67 Bravo Delta. I am under illegal detention by state law enforcement. Location, Highway 87, exit 43. 2 officers, Wallace and Daly, are violating federal statute. Immediate escalation protocol recommended. Over." There was a pause, then a cold, automated voice replied, "Confirm rank and distress parameters." Camille didn't blink. Brigadier General, immediate threat to national security protocol. I am under duress. Repeat, under duress. Behind her, Wallace scoffed. What, are we in a movie now? He turned to Daly, chuckling, but the laughter didn't reach his eyes. The name Brigadier General was starting to sink in like acid beneath his skin. He tried to shake it off with more bravado. Hey, tell your little fans to stop filming before someone gets in trouble. Wallace snapped at the growing group of bystanders, but his voice lacked conviction. Daly, meanwhile, had begun to fidget. He was staring at Camille like he was finally seeing her, not as a target or a joke, but as something he didn't understand, and that scared him. You don't think she's military, do you? He muttered to Wallace. I think she's a damn good actress, Wallace replied, though his eyes kept flicking towards her with mounting unease. Camille ignored them both. She turned to the young woman who had given her the phone, Lana Reyes. Their eyes met briefly. Thank you, Camille whispered. You don't owe me that, Lana replied. You owe it to everyone who gets treated like you did. Wallace had had enough. He stepped forward, furious now. That's it. You're done with your little performance. He reached out to snatch the phone from her hands. But before he could touch her, a broad-shouldered man wearing a tattered veteran's cap stepped between them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Try it, he said. See what happens. Wallace froze. Daly took an unconscious step back. The balance of power was shifting, quietly but unmistakably. Camille handed the phone back to Lana, her message already transmitted. The call went through, she said softly. They're coming. Wallace sneered. Lady, you have no idea how the system works. Camille looked him dead in the eyes. That's where you're wrong. I am the system. You're just someone who thinks a badge makes you untouchable. Wallace clenched his jaw, his voice rising now, the fear starting to leak into his fury. You're threatening a law officer. No, she said, her tone like steel. I'm giving you a chance. You still have a few minutes left to do the right thing. Daly's voice cracked. We thought you were suspicious. We were told. You were told to stop black people driving nice cars, Camille interrupted, her voice breaking through him like glass. You weren't verifying anything. You were asserting power you don't deserve. There was no need to raise her voice. Every word landed like a verdict. Daly's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Camille looked toward the highway. In the distance, heat waves still shimmered. But now shapes were forming. Black vehicles, moving fast but silently, coming into focus. Unmarked. Federal. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She simply said, "Time's up." For a moment, it was as if the entire highway held its breath. The only sound was the soft clicking of phones recording, dozens of them now, as bystanders stood witness to something shifting in real time. The kind of shift that doesn't roar, but slides into place with the terrifying precision of a blade being unsheathed. Then, without sirens, without flashing lights, they arrived. 3 unmarked black SUVs rolled up with surgical timing. Their doors opened all at once, as if choreographed. 2 men stepped out of the lead vehicle. Neither wore uniforms, but both carried an unmistakable presence. Suits tailored but not flashy. Sunglasses are not for fashion, but for function. They didn't flash badges. They were the badge. Wallace and Daly froze like prey, sensing a predator just outside their field of vision. One of the men, tall and clean-shaven, looked directly at Camille. General Johnson? She straightened, her hands still cuffed behind her back. Confirmed. He gave a single nod. We received your distress call. Defense Command triangulated your location via backup GPS. The second man was already moving, swift, practiced. Like this was routine. He approached Wallace and Daly. Without raising his voice, he said, "Remove your weapons. Now." Daly's hand hovered at his sidearm. Wallace tried to puff his chest. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" The man didn't blink. Federal Protection Agency. The woman you assaulted is a high-ranking officer within the Strategic High Command of the Department of Defense. You will disarm immediately. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then the weight of those words dropped like concrete. Daly's fingers twitched as he fumbled to unclasp his weapon belt. Wallace didn't move. You made a mistake, Camille said coldly, turning her head for the first time since the agents arrived. But your real mistake wasn't the cuffs. It wasn't the words. I was thinking I didn't belong in this uniform. The taller agent stepped forward with a slim tool. In one motion, he unlocked the cuffs. The metallic click rang out like a gavel falling in a courtroom. Camille didn't flinch. She simply rubbed her wrists, the skin red and raw. Wallace finally stammered, "We were told the vehicle looked suspicious. We were verifying. You knew what you were doing," the agent cut him off. "And now you'll remain still until a federal jurisdiction unit arrives. Do not move. Do not speak unless addressed." Camille turned toward Wallace, who looked at her for the first time with real fear, not of a weapon but of consequence. She took one step forward, her presence overwhelming in its calm. "You asked for verification," she said. "You cuffed me, called me names, destroyed government property. It's all been recorded on bystanders' phones and your body cams. That's verification enough." The second agent stepped forward again, holding a tablet with a glowing red interface. "General, you may now initiate emergency disciplinary protocol. Shall I proceed?" Camille looked from the screen to the officers. Both were pale, breathing unevenly, still hoping perhaps for a way out. But she didn't press the button, not yet. Instead, she folded her arms across her chest and said quietly, "No, not yet. I want them to sit with it. I want them to feel what it's like not knowing if tomorrow they'll still be officers, or just two names in an internal memo no one reads." Wallace's jaw tightened. Daly looked like he might be sick. Camille's voice remained low. "I want them to understand that fear, not through violence, but through certainty, the kind they can't outrun." The agent nodded silently and tapped the tablet. The red icon flashed. Protocol activated. A quiet descended, not of peace, but of reckoning, the kind that changes men long after the moment ends. The sun dipped lower behind the ridge, casting long amber streaks across Highway 87. What had begun as another routine stop, at least in the eyes of Officers Wallace and Daly, was now unraveling into something neither training nor swagger had prepared them for. The flashing red icon on the agent's tablet continued to pulse like a heartbeat, calm, steady, and irreversible. Around them, a circle of silent witnesses had formed. No one shouted. No one needed to. The quiet was heavier than the noise. Camille Johnson stood centered in it all, wrists still bearing the marks of restraint, uniform slightly rumpled, face smeared with blood. And yet she radiated command, not by force, not by volume, by presence. Wallace finally broke the silence. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, though the words lacked structure, more exhaled than argued. Camille tilted her head. "Am I?" Daly tried to find footing. "We were just doing our jobs, following procedure. If someone reports a suspicious vehicle—" "That wasn't a report," she cut in, her voice like frost beneath silk. "That was a reflex, a bias dressed up as procedure. You looked at a black woman in a military vehicle and saw something you thought didn't fit. So you made it fit your narrative, with handcuffs, with spit, with humiliation." Daly's mouth opened, but nothing came. Wallace took a step forward, desperation now leaking through every word. "Look, we didn't know, and—" "No," she said sharply, eyes narrowing. "You didn't want to know. Because if you knew who I was, if you believed it, then you'd have to face what you are." It was the first time her voice rose. Not a scream, a wave, one that left both men visibly rattled. One of the federal agents stepped forward, nodding toward Camille. "General, transport unit from the JAG Corps is 3 minutes out. They'll handle the detainment and charges." Wallace's shoulders sagged. Daly leaned against the patrol car for balance, the gravity of it all finally pressing down. For them, time no longer ticked forward. It circled like a slow spiral inward. Camille didn't look at either man. She looked toward Lana, the young woman who had given her the phone. Lana's eyes welled, but she stood tall. "You did more than lend a phone," Camille told her. "You reminded me why we serve. Not for ranks, not for medals, but for each other." Lana nodded, swallowing hard. Just then the JAG vehicle pulled up. Efficient, inconspicuous. 2 agents stepped out, crisp uniforms carrying with them not weapons, but authority. One read aloud, "Per federal code, Officers Wallace and Daly are hereby suspended without pay pending investigation." Allegations include abuse of authority, racial discrimination, unlawful detainment of a federal officer, destruction of government property, and assault. Wallace closed his eyes. Daly's hands trembled at his sides. Their badges were removed. Their service weapons were collected. Credentials stripped clean. Camille watched, silent, composed. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, only finality. When it was over, one of the JAG officers turned to her. "Ma'am, would you like medical attention or an escort back to your command post?" She shook her head. "No, I'll drive myself." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" Camille nodded. "I've had enough being told where I can and cannot go today." He gave a respectful nod and stepped back. As the sun cast its last golden rays across the highway, Camille walked past the two disgraced officers. They didn't look up. She didn't stop. But just as she reached her vehicle, she turned slightly and said one final thing, not for them, but for everyone who was listening. Justice doesn't always come with blue lights and noise. Sometimes it arrives in silence, wearing no badge, because truth doesn't need one. Then she opened the door, started the engine, and drove into the cooling dusk. Night had begun to settle over Highway 87. The once scorching asphalt now cooled under the fading light. The crowd that had gathered was thinning out, but a few lingered, some still recording, others simply watching in reverent silence as the final stages of reckoning unfolded. Wallace and Daly sat quietly on the curb, wrists resting on their knees like schoolboys waiting for detention. But there would be no bell to save them, no sympathetic hand to explain it all away. Only consequence, measured and methodical, descending like evening fog. Camille stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her uniform slightly rumpled but unshaken in dignity. Her eyes were tired, but not defeated. She didn't gloat. There was nothing in her face that said revenge, only resolution. One of the JAG officers approached her, clipboard in hand. "General Johnson, the statement is ready for your review. Would you like to sign now?" Camille studied the page but didn't reach for the pen. "Not yet." "Let them wait a few more hours," she said softly. "Let them sit in silence. I want the next chapter of their lives to begin the same way they treated mine, with uncertainty and the illusion of control." The officer nodded and stepped back. A breeze passed through. It didn't carry tension anymore. It carried clarity. Camille turned toward the horizon. The black SUVs were gone. The sun had fully dipped below the trees. And for the first time in hours, she felt still, not in her body, but in her mind. Justice hadn't come from shouting or chaos. It hadn't needed her to raise her voice or throw a punch. It had come because she had known who she was. And because, when the moment arrived, she didn't flinch. She walked back to her SUV alone. As she opened the door, she caught sight of her reflection in the side mirror. Lip bruised, wrist marked, eyes steady. She didn't need to fix anything. She had already won. Takeaway message. True power doesn't shout, it stands. And when justice comes, it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply arrives and does not leave.